¿Tardes ya o...?
Ya son todavía mañana.
Todavía no.
Todavía mañana.
Bueno, buenos días a todos.
Pero bienvenida aquí.
Muchas gracias.
Bueno, welcome to Migration Policy Institute, everybody. We will actually start. And special welcome to Secretary Sánchez Cordero. Thank you so much for being with us here today. It's a real honor to have you here at Migration Policy Institute. Ambassador Marta Bárcena, it's great to have you here for the first time. You have been a breath of fresh air. We've really enjoyed working with you for the past 2 months here. And I think I said to you, it feels like you've been here so much longer because you've been so active for 2 months. Dr. Donatio Guillen, Commissioner of INAMI, of Instituto Nacional de Migración, Mexico's National Migration Institute, a longtime friend and a great scholar in Mexico, but also now the leader of Mexico's migration policy, and great pleasure to have you here, as well as many others from the Mexican government. Thank you for joining us, who've come with the Secretary. Welcome to MPI. I think all of you who are here know that we are an organization that does fact-based research on migration issues, both in the United States and around the world. We have an office in Europe as well as an office in the United States, but we work globally. We work a lot in Mexico and in Latin America generally. And we also do a lot to encourage dialogue around migration issues around the world and to think of pragmatic ideas on migration issues, on migration policy, in what is often a contentious space, but in which we believe that you actually can reach reasoned policy solutions to complex issues through research and through dialogue. We're very honored to have with us Olga Sánchez Cordero, not only the Mexico Secretary of the Interior, but the person responsible for migration policy in Mexico, but also a great jurist, a longtime member of the Supreme Court, as well as a legal scholar, and I'll introduce her more formally in a moment. MPI has had a long interest in how we manage Mexico-U.S. migration. We had a regional migration study group that Dimitri Papadimitriou and Doris Meisner here, and I actually, when I was at the Wilson Center, we had a chance to work together, convening, thinking of the migration system between Central America, Mexico, and the United States. We've very much taken the idea that we have to think collectively, that the U.S. cannot set its migration policy alone, or Mexico or Central America. Yes, we're sovereign countries. Yes, we make our own decisions, but we cannot make these decisions without dialoguing and talking with the other countries, because otherwise it's ineffective. We also believe that there's a few relationships that matter more than the relationship with Mexico. And let me say, I think we can argue that what happens with North Korea, and there's a summit going on or just ended right now, matters for the fate of peace in the world. But for day-to-day life in the United States, there may be no country that matters more than Mexico for our future. And you don't have to look any further than last Sunday at the Oscars, okay? Oh, people know what I'm talking about. This is good, right? Alfonso Cuarón? Yes, Alfonso Cuarón. 5 of the last 6 directors to win Best Director of the Oscar are Mexican. Okay? That's a great, testament to Mexico and to talent in Mexico, some of which is in this room, not necessarily semantic talent here, it's a diplomatic and legal talent, but enormous talent in many ways in Mexico. But it's also a testament to how the cultural industries and the cultural communities in the two countries are deeply interrelated. Part of why you have so many Mexicans doing well at the Oscars, and by the way, so many Canadians doing well also, we just don't remember that anymore, is because we really are linked in unique ways with each other. This is true in sports. We're about to host the World Cup together. The 3 countries of North America. The NBA, Major League Baseball, and the NFL all play games in Mexico, by the way. Economically, we're tied together. We talk about NAFTA or USMCA as though it's a trade agreement. But in fact, much of what we have done, as Ambassador Arturo Sarucán knows, much of what we do together is in fact not trade. Chris Wilson has written a lot about this, is we actually build things together. We actually make things for the global economy together. We are linked economies in deeply profound ways. But of course, the deepest ties are among people. Right? The deepest ties we have are among people on both sides of the border. Now, these ties are created because we're neighbors. Dr. Guillen was just down in Nuevo Laredo for the annual celebration of the Abrazo with the Speaker of the House, right? Where the people come across from both Laredos and they give a hug at the border to reaffirm on George Washington's birthday the closeness between the two countries. This is obviously much closer at the border, but it goes beyond the border these days. This goes beyond just strictly people who live near each other, and that's because of migration. Historically, most of that migration was northward. Historically, there are 11.3 million Mexican-born people who live in the United States as a result of the enormous migration that took place primarily over the last 20 to 40 years. That migration has now slowed a great deal. Mexicans are the largest immigrant group in the United States, still. but they're no longer the largest group of recent immigrants in the United States. There is more current immigration coming, legal immigration from China and India, and even if you look at unauthorized immigration across the border, we know from December that actually Mexicans were the third group actually coming across the U.S.-Mexico border, which is quite surprising in terms of unauthorized migration. The number of Mexican-born people living in the United States has actually dropped from 11.7 million to 11.3 million, despite continued migration from Mexico. More people are returning to Mexico than coming here. That migration, however, has left a huge mark on American society. Almost 1 in 8 people in the United States is of Mexican descent. Mexican food, Mexican holidays, Mexican idioms, and of course cinema is part of American culture today. And today the greatest migration, net migration, is probably from the United States to Mexico, where there's anywhere from 1 million to 2 million American citizens living in Mexico. Right? If we follow the Mexican census, INEGI, it's about 700,000. If we follow the U.S. Embassy, it's somewhere between 1.5 to 1.8 million. That also is affecting Mexico's education system and cultural norms in the cities where Americans settle in the way that the Mexican migration to the United States did in the past and continues to do today. And these become transmission belts between our countries. Of course, today the most visible group that moves between our two countries are Central Americans, primarily from the Northern Triangle, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, but increasingly a few from Nicaragua as well. We have a study group with El Colegio de México, between MPI and El Colegio de México, where we've been looking at how migration patterns are changing. And interesting, one of our findings has been, and we were lucky that Commissioner Guillen joined us actually for the first meeting we had there. One of our findings that has surprised all of us is how similar the challenges are between Mexico and the United States today. When we are talking about similar issues about how we deal with our asylum systems, how do we deal with employment-based migration? What do we do in terms of enforcement policies to encourage legal rather than irregular migration? What do we do in terms of integration of people who are moving into the school system? It turns out it's hard to tell this because of the noise around immigration in this country and around the world, but in reality we're actually much more similar than we think. So today we're fortunate to have Secretary Sánchez Cordero here to speak about Mexico's migration policies and how the new administration of Andrés Manuel López Obrador, became president in December, is trying to shift policies to deal with migration in new ways. When we get to the discussion, she has kindly offered to take questions. You can tweet questions at us. Yes, you can tweet at us at Migration Policy. You can send emails to events@migrationpolicy.org, and you can use the hashtag MPIDiscuss. We know we have a lot of you outside of the room who are following this as well. We will only have a transmission in English. Her remarks will be in Spanish. The transmission will be in English. You should know that. And those in the room can certainly partake in the conversation. The Secretary is one of Mexico's most respected jurists. She served for 20 years on the Supreme Court. She, before that, was on the Mexico City Supreme Court. She's a renowned legal scholar, has taught at UNAM, Mexico's National University, and other universities. And she was elected to the Senate, but had to take what they call in Mexico license, had to step down from that in order to take the position of Secretary of the Interior. I should note before we start that yesterday the list of 100 global thinkers came out from the respected Foreign Policy magazine. If you look here, you will see her face. She is one of the 100 global thinkers. This is a high honor. She did. Right, you found out last night, right? Yes. She is listed here because of her efforts to rethink public security policy, which is a major issue also under her purview in Mexico. But the other issue that is under her purview that is extremely sensitive and which she'll be talking about today is rethinking Mexico's migration policy. How do we do things differently? We very much appreciate her time to join us today and her willingness to offer remarks on a controversial but extremely important topic for both of our countries. Thank you, Secretary Sánchez Cordero. Le invito aquí al podio. Muchas gracias. O si quiere quedarse ahí como guste.
No, yo estoy bien.
I'm going to speak in Spanish, correct? Yes, no problem, and thank you so much. Excuse me. Thank you very much. Si no, tiene que usarlo ahora. Good morning to all of you. In reality, for us, it's a great opportunity to be here this morning with you, speaking about and exchanging opinions, because this is not a conference, but rather an exchange of ideas and opinions about the new policy of the President of Mexico, who, of course, we haven't even reached 3 months. We're going on 100 days in experiencing the government of President López Obrador since the first days of December. So we have just been working these few months. But believe me, the intensity of our work would seem to be not so many months, but rather years. I would like to mention to you and share with you the fact that the Secretariat of Governance before the President took over had a responsibility with regard to security on the national level and public safety. And now the Secretary of Governance must modify according to the organic law that the Secretary of the Interior must have the responsibility for governing the nation, governance of the nation, and in addition, the subject of human rights and the subject of migration, of course, as well, relationships with the governments of the federal entities, the Congress, of the National Congress and that of the states and the different entities on a federal level and from the states. The migration subject, of course, is a subject in which there is a tremendous interdependence between Mexico and the United States. We have one of the longest borders of the world, and this implies, as a necessity, close ties, as have been mentioned by our dear Andrew, are close ties that unite us, as well as our geographic neighborliness. So we have to. We do have different positions regarding migration, but this has an undeniable impact in the U.S. and in our nation. For this reason, I would like to join with you here, as I did with the group with experts and academics a few moments ago, in order to design or speak with you regarding the overviews, just overview of the key principles of our new migration policy of the President of López Obrador, of the new government. I'd like to tell you as well, it has been indicated by he who we invited, no, rather our sponsor. There's been a big change in the migratory flows between Mexico and the United States. Many people don't know, but we must say so. Basically, during these past years, the net rate of Mexicans who have come into the U.S. has been close to zero, or even to some extent on a negative flow. In other words, we are not a problem as far as a migratory flow for the United States, but we are trying to be part of the solution of the migration flows. This is an important fact because many people are not aware of this. They believe that migration and immigration flows of Mexicans to the United States continues to be a large topic, an important topic, but it is no longer so. Several years ago, the migration rate of Mexicans to the U.S. has been reduced tremendously to such an extent that now we're even speaking of a rate that is close to zero or even a negative flow because of deportations that we have experienced of Mexicans and those Mexicans who have returned from the U.S. to our nation. In reality, the phenomenon that has changed who has come to the United States is the Central Americans who are experiencing exodus from the northern triangle of Central America in particular. President López Obrador believes in his political philosophy and what he has set forth as his migration policy that migrants or migration is not because they want to leave their places of origin, their families, their culture, or their surroundings, or their friends. Immigration flows are due to a need, which is essential because of the precariousness of the economic, political, and social structure existing in these nations, which is to such an extent that it is what moves them to have a mass departure of its citizens, their citizens. They are not migrating because they want to, or just because they feel like it. It's out of a need, because of a lack of opportunities in their nations of origin and because of violence. These are the two key reasons for migration. It is so much so that the most important migration that we are seeing is that of young people from Central America who are migrating because of a lack of opportunities. And I'd like to share with you some figures that seem important to me. In El Salvador, they had the highest rate in the world of homicides in 2015. In addition, during the same year, the cost of criminality in Honduras was equivalent to 10% of the GDP of this nation, according to the World Bank. This situation of precariousness, this lack of security, and to give you an example, in El Salvador, the minimum wage is $7.5 per day. In the U.S., it's approximately $7.2 per hour. So this is the difficulty we see in life and the conditions of life in these nations. Therefore, as long as these inhabitants of the northern triangle of Central America continue to lack, and I'm underlying this because it's the view of our president, opportunities for progressing in their place of origin, Mexico will continue to receive a migratory flow that is very large in this region. In this regard, there is estimate that in the next 5 years, the number of Central American immigrants who will enter our nation could reach a level of 700,000 individuals per year, especially considering the addition of a large number of Nicaraguans as well. They were not important originally. They're not large numbers originally because the Nicaraguans would usually go south to Costa Rica and not to the north. But now the political situation in that country can lead to a greater migratory flow from Nicaragua, even though traditionally speaking it was only the Northern Triangle that migrated to the U.S. Facing this situation, what will the policy be, the new policy be of President López Obrador? Radically different from the prior one. The key point of this policy is to handle the causes of this migration. What are the causes for this migration? Poverty and the lack of opportunities and violence. Therefore, the president wants to have a region in which we can develop and reduce violence and criminality. How in our government are we planning to reduce the crime rate, also handling the key social reasons, our children, our adolescents, to provide them the opportunities that they have not had for years. The young people have been forgotten over time. We have forgotten, even in Mexico, our youth. We have a problem. Yes, we do. It's a problem of violence. Yes, we do. A problem as well of migration and immigration flows of the Central Americans. Yes. What are we thinking about? What are we suggesting we can do about it? We want to respect the human rights of the migrants. For the new policy of Mexico for López Obrador, they are not criminals. They are people who are migrating for the reasons of precariousness and violence. Therefore, the government of the nation wants to respect, without restrictions, the human rights of the migrants. What do we want? In addition to this, to have a migration policy that is organized, safe, and regulated. In previous administrations, we had a migratory flow also of Central Americans that we didn't know who was coming into our nation, where they were coming from, what their nationality was, their identity, who they were. Now, we want to, for reasons of respecting their human rights first, that's the most important, respect. And number one of their rights is the human right to identity. Who am I? Where do I come from? What is my nationality? What is my age? What is my name? The human right to identity. Based on this, starting here, we can guarantee the rest of the human rights. Secondly, this regular and orderly migration is something that we would like to do basically because the flow before, we had 370 illegal points of entry in the nation where the migratory flow entered in our nation. What was the previous policy? The previous policy was basically to contain them, repress, and deport the migrants. Currently, the policy is order, security, and regularity in our migration. This implies registering and having a legal stay of migrants in our nation. Okay.
We believe this, and we've shared this with the U.S. government, that promoting development in southern Mexico and in the northern triangle area of Central America will keep people rooted in their places of origin, or even in the southeast of Mexico, and we will deal with the causes of migratory flows that come to the United States. We have our new commissioner with us, our new commissioner for migration, appointed by the president to handle migration issues specifically, and we are exploring different migration documents in order to serve these Central American migrants. If you look at how the caravans entered, and actually today the new migration model, the safest model for migrants, is through caravans. It's a new phenomenon that we had not previously experienced. In fact, we need to look at who is promoting caravans, what organizations are promoting them. No? Who the leaders of these caravans are, how people are recruited from Honduras, the leaders of these caravans are recruited, and how this migratory movement occurs. It is unusual, but soon will become normal, caravans coming towards the north. If you look at the difference in October and how the door was slammed in the previous administration and how most of these migrants arrived at the northern border, almost all of them arriving in Tijuana. And I'd like to say this because we have the coordinator for civil protection, how assistance was provided for the caravan that arrived suddenly and that was in our country illegally, and then how the second caravan came through, which was regular, orderly, and secure on our bridge that goes from Chiapas to Guatemala. You will see a big difference. People were lined up in an orderly fashion, waiting to be registered. And just some information for you, the caravan that arrived suddenly in October, practically the entire caravan made it to the north. The orderly, regular, and secure caravan that we assisted in December of last year, on January 17th, thank you for the correction, January 17th, what do you think happened? We served 13,500 people, and of these people, 10% made it to the north. 90% of that caravan has a humanitarian visa, and they're able to move throughout our country. However, they did not arrive all the way north. Not all 13,500 made it north. They remained in southeastern Mexico. So it is interesting to see how the problem of this migratory flow was dealt with before and after. After, there was order. There was security. It was regular, dealing with the causes of this phenomenon of migration. Before, containment and mass deportations. It would seem that the message that we are sending is that Mexico is not doing a lot when it comes to migration. It would seem that by not containing and conducting mass deportations that we are not doing what is necessary. But the truth is, the philosophy of our new president is a political philosophy based on human rights. It is a political philosophy that believes in dealing with the causes of crime, the causes of migration. How is this being done? It is being done through development, through providing services for young people, serving the elderly, with scholarship programs, with programs for young people to help build their futures, with programs that will plant seeds for an entire life. This is a program of the mass planting of trees in the southeastern part of Mexico for lumber and for fruit, dealing with the causes of poverty and violence. The perception might be different, but deep down we are convinced that this is the right policy. The services we've provided for these migratory flows has been spectacularly positive. Through civil protection, we have shelters, we have medical services. Through our Navy and our Army, we've provided meals for 13,500 people in the southeastern part of Mexico. 3 meals a day, health care and shelters. We have recruited people, offering them employment possibilities. There are employment agencies in the southeast who are providing employment opportunities for these migrants. And as you can see, our policies and our political philosophies are very different. Looking at the causes, dealing with the problem at the very roots, not by using measures of repression and mass deportation. I'm not sure if, having said this, you might have a different vision of what is currently being done in Mexico. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. Thank you for your comments on what is currently being done. I'll move to English.
The secretary, you can email it, and you're not in the room. If you're in the room, just raise your hand in a minute. But you can email us if you're watching the webcast, events@migrationpolicy.org. You can hashtag MPI Discuss, or you can tweet questions at Migration Policy. And so with that, we're going to pass back into Spanish and go to questions. I see a hand up in the back. I also saw Daryl Lynn to ask a question. I see Priscilla here.
Entiendo inglés. ¿Entiende
Sí, entiende inglés, pero vamos a seguir en
no
español.
Ah,
Sí.
okay.
Entonces vamos a empezar con este lado y ahorita vengo contigo también, entonces.
Good morning. I have a question about the protection protocols. We see it in a completely different fashion. Of course, we do have protocols in place, but we are trying to put together a protocol that is even better when it comes to providing services for migrants. And this issue is one that our commissioner, who is here, is dealing with. It's a priority issue, creating these protocols. He has much experience in migration issues, so what we're doing is, through civil protection as well, and through our commissioner, we are putting together very specific protocols for assisting migrants. It is radically different. And do you hope to expand the program with the U.S.? And what is your question? Do you expect to expand the protocol program with the U.S. 0235? Unofficially remain in Mexico. Right, the protocol for migrant services, Central Americans on the border. If you're referring to 235, I'd like to say the following. And Mexico's position needs to be very clear. This is a unilateral measure of the U.S. government. Some of these people have been returned, some, not all of them, because some came from previous caravans, but some already have visitor cards for humanitarian reasons. These cards, of course, are cards that allow them to move around throughout Mexico, and there would be no reason for us not to receive them if they already, if their stay in our country were already legal. But if they did not have a card, then for strictly humanitarian reasons, because President López Obrador has wanted a policy that ensures rights, and for strictly humanitarian reasons, we don't let them on the bridge. We receive them for humanitarian reasons. The implementation of Rule 235 is unilateral on the part of the U.S. Mr. Quintana from Sequil. Yes, I'm a human rights defender. My question is about Venezuelan migration. 3.5 million in the continent, and Mexico might receive up to 100,000 people between 2013 and 2018. 2,000 requests from the Refugee Commission were presented. The Cartagena Declaration has been applied due to humanitarian reasons, and the situation was in place. When we talk about the policies of the executive when it comes to Venezuela, then my question is, will Mexico be a leader when it comes to the international protection of refugees, when it comes to enforcing the Cartagena Declaration? The answer is a definitive yes. Actually, we are strengthening through the UNHCR, we along with the UN and the UNHCR and our Comar, we are strengthening this for refugees. So the answer there is yes. There is room in our country for many refugees.
Ask in English if that's all right.
Yes, that's okay.
Can you talk about the response of the government to the caravan that came through and was contained at Piedras Negras earlier this month? How was that decision made to respond with containment, and is that something we can expect to see in future with large groups?
Very interesting. Your question is very interesting. While we were providing orderly and secure and regular protection, there was also a sudden arrival of 800 people. Those who arrived in Piedras Negras were, most of them, the large majority of them, were those people who gave this knock at the door on a parallel basis. We had an orderly line, we had people waiting, and of course, with a large interest in being regularized. And suddenly, one night, in the early morning hours, without being able to contain anything, we were ordering our migration in a very orderly fashion, but then they knocked down the door, basically. I'm not sure how this was reported internationally when these people were crossing the bridge. This caravan, or these people who basically burst down the door, began to walk towards the U.S. I've been asked, and I asked the governor of Coahuila. The governor supported us greatly in everything that had to do with refuges for the migrants, shelters. I spoke with him several times, and I asked him, why did you make trucks available if they're irregular migrants who did not want to follow our instructions as to waiting in line to come in an orderly fashion into our nation? In reality, we were told, first of all, that there were many children, pregnant women, and we, for humanitarian reasons, could not leave these children and pregnant women to lose their babies or have miscarriages or leave the little children there, because there were 400 kilometers to Saltillo, Piedras Negras. So that's why the buses were provided. But once they arrived there, there was a facility so that they could have a safe shelter with doctors, and we began to regularize the people within the same shelter. Of course, the shelter was closed because there was a demand in Sonora for workers in Nuevo León and Monterrey, and there was a requirement for employees in another place, in El Bajío. And we took them to the different places where there was a demand for laborers. So I'd like to tell you as well, because this is very interesting, that these people who came through without reporting in and went to Piedras Negras, there were certain people who had criminal records. And you are more aware of this in a more exact fashion. Maybe you'd like to comment on this because you handled the caravan in Piedras Negras directly. I would just like to mention a couple of points. David's in charge of civil protection of the same Secretariat of Governance. Yes, it was in the early morning of the 18th of January. They broke through when we had a very organized protocol. They walked towards the north, and got to Piedras Negras, and there were other regular migrants in the nation. There were 3 levels of government: the federal, state, and municipal government, with the support of the social sector and the private sector, installed the shelter and established a more regular process, as the minister has mentioned. And in this process, obviously, some people were found who should not receive their visitor's card for humanitarian reasons. And so I'd like to tell you, I was there several nights, and 90% of those who were there were ashamed of the Mexican. They were ashamed because the Mexican government had given them a helping hand at the border, and they wished that they had taken on that option for receiving the card for humanitarian reasons at the border, so that they could come in and begin to be inserted in services in the nation for programs that had been established by the President for labor and others. But they said they weren't aware of it, and they had other information, so that's why they decided to break through the border without accepting the invitation that was given. And they were there for 15, 16 days, and the social and relocation of them, or return to their nations, they were supported in returning voluntarily to their nations. Thank you, David. There are many questions in very little time, so now we'll go on to Pepe Briceño. We'll take 3 questions in a row. Thank you very much, Secretary. What is the limit of capacity that Mexico has to accept people in terms of numbers who are affected by 235? I know there are many who have been returned, but what is the amount that Mexico could accept? The second question is, in Washington, there's a lot of discouragement or a misunderstanding about this 235. With regard to the right to asylum in this country, these people, both accepting them in national territory and also setting barriers for them to come to the ports of entry. Now, Ariel, if you'd like to go ahead with another question. Madam Secretary, I'm from Televisa. I'd like to ask you, you've been telling us in this conference that there are certain people who come in the caravan, and you've referred several times to them. And who are these people? What groups do they belong to? Could you give us the name of their affiliation? It's very difficult. I will answer you first, and then you, the other person. Televisa and... Now, for example, we identify the leaders, first of all, of non-governmental organizations that are recruiting these caravans. There are some from People Without Borders, for example. We are identifying people. Otherwise, we wouldn't have done it if we didn't have this regularization. There were very few, less than 1% of the people who had criminal records. We were exchanging information with the U.S. precisely. There was 1 or 2 who had a red flag from Interpol. But everything happened so quickly that only now we're able to perfect the situation so that in real time we can handle the situation in the U.S. and the countries of origin, Guatemala, Honduras, Belize, and El Salvador, who can tell us right away if they are people who are fleeing justice, for example, because it could be that in this huge number of 13,500 people that they could be joined by those who are fleeing justice. So we couldn't do this all in 4 days, but now we're able to, in almost real time, obtain the information that we can exchange with their nations of origin and the U.S. to find out what the legal situation of some of these people is. You were mentioning that they had a red flag. Some of the leaders as well who were managing this illegally, this is a huge business. Smuggling people is a huge business, so let's suppose that we're not conceding that these people smugglers charge $6,000 or more dollars, and it's $300,000. The dimension of this business that we're referring to, and what do we want to do? We want to break this down, and how can we do this? By regulating the system, having a safe border. This is the subject. This is what we're trying to do. So the 235 and the criticism of the cooperation of the Mexican government with the U.S. I'd like to emphasize that this is a unilateral decision on the part of the U.S. And the president of Andrés Manuel López Obrador has set up a policy that is strictly humanitarian and looking to defend human rights. Of course, some of these already have our card. Others are receiving a legal stay in our nation based on different migratory forms. We have a way that people can come that's FM, a form that is FM multiple, because we want to regulate immigration in our nation. I believe this is a sovereign right of Mexico to have organized migration and deal with the causes. The president has set forth the causes. What is the limit of people who Mexico is willing to receive? We are in the process of evaluating this. We have to assess this right now. Very few have been turned back, 150 up to yesterday. What would you consider to be an acceptable universe for Mexico? We're only putting on the bridge those people who have a right to a hearing before immigration judges. They are in the process of requesting asylum. Chris Ramon from Bipartisan Policy Center. Cristobal Ramon here in Washington, D.C. I have a question regarding Comar data. The figures say that people are trying to obtain asylum in Mexico. In 2016, I believe there were human rights. In 2000, then it was a generalized situation. But in 2018, the largest category was non-specified, like 60%, more or less. Why was that the case? If you see the other figures of since 2013, there are different reasons and different ways that people wanted to find or obtain asylum. But in 2018, there were more non-specified.
I don't know why. Do you have that information? I don't have the category our colleague is referring to offhand. It's not unspecified. So, right, if we had irregular migration that were not secure, then we believe that exponentially we could have in 2019 about 48,000 people request asylum who are in the process of doing so. There's a question from our colleague who's watching the video, our colleague Dominguez, who works with us, and he asked what plans you have to invest in Comar, because there were many thousand requests last year, and you're talking about 48,000. So how are you going to be able to process all of those applications? Comar was a public institution that had few resources, and so what we are thinking of doing is reinforcing even the bureaucratic structure of Comar in order to process all of these immigration requests. And in Mexico, even more so now, but traditionally, our country has been a friendly, hospitable country. And we would like to continue to be one and when it comes to asylum and refugees, we can strengthen Comar, and with the support of the UNHCR, we can start to strengthen our agency for asylum and for refugees in order to expedite the requests that we receive. This question comes via email from Maggie Crittman from the Fox News Channel. She asks if this model you talked about, it could, we could be talking in the next 5 years, 700,000 migrants from Central America. This model of regularizing migrants, is this sustainable with that many migrants? The thing is, it's not. It's a circular migration. We're talking about circular migration. Some stay for a few months, some stay for a few years, others are visitors. It is circular migration in this entire area, so that is what we aim to do. We don't have numbers in 2017, 2018. What the numbers are 300,000 illegal crossings through Mexico, and many of them arrived to the northern border. We have one last question in back, and then we have to go. I believe that the secretary... Do we have time for one more? One more, and that is all. One more in the back. Rafael Bernal. Hi. Madam Secretary, I wanted to ask you about how you measure the success of your migratory policies. You mentioned that only 10% of the caravan of 13,500 arrived to the northern border. So how did you adopt this metric for success? The fewer people who arrive at the northern border, that's better. Does it speak to agreements with the U.S., relations with the U.S., or what led you to that conclusion? Well, currently we're just starting to implement a public policy. We've been in government for just over 2 months, but it was a good exercise. I would call it a successful exercise. Of the 13,500 who were regularized, under 10% made it to the northern border. Well, that means that Mexico is attractive to these migrants as a place to stay. Currently, we have a great opportunity to give opportunities to young people in Mexico and obviously young people in Central America. Mexico is made up of many Mexicos. And in southern Mexico, the area is very similar to the Northern Triangle in Central America in many ways. So we're talking about regional development. This is what the president is currently considering as a project, regional development. And truly the idea is to turn these irregular flows to regular documented flows. Regular flows then many who stay in Mexico. There's another reason as well, in addition to human rights, national security. National security, documenting these people and knowing who is in the country. Previously, that wasn't done. We wish you great luck in this endeavor, and thank you very much for being here at the Migration Policy Institute. We hope to have the commissioner, the ambassador, and other members of your team here in the future. Thank you very much.